Our speaker of the day is John Webb. He's a visitor from over east, from South Australia. He's here on holidays, and he's already given a couple of talks on what happened in Darwin after Cyclone Tracy. I'll leave it to John to tell you what he did and what position he held, and he's got a heap of photographs to show, and he's under a bit of pressure. He needs to leave for another engagement this afternoon. So John, would you like to come forward, please?
Thanks very much, Brian. Well, what a wonderful looking group of people. I've never seen such a great and alert group of old flyers. It's a pleasure to be here. A short introduction. I've been in aviation since I think 1960. I worked for a short time with Miller Airlines. Then I joined the what was known as the Department of Civil Aviation in 1963, and I stayed with them and its successors for 38 years or something, retired in 1995. I do fly a bit, although I don't have a current medical. I can only fly unofficially, I suppose. Done a little bit of gliding, but most of my in-command was in things like V-tailed bonanzas, debonaires, things like that. And I didn't pay for much of it myself. It was the Department of Civil Aviation's aircraft. We're a little bit of background about cyclones. Cyclones are quite important to Australia. We have more than 10% of the cyclones that occur in the world. This is a map showing the tracks of cyclones that have happened to Australia between 1928 and 1999 or so, 2000. And as you can see, the tracks cover most of Australia. Most of them don't get down as far as the southern capital cities, but there's a lot there. Cyclones, they're called tropical cyclones, but there aren't any cyclones occurring in the actual tropic area. As you know, it's fairly calm in the actual tropic. They have a lot of rain, but no extreme winds. Why was the cyclone in Darwin so special? It was a narrow eye. It was only 12 kilometres wide, but it had the same energy as an extreme cyclone of 40 kilometres wide. And it was unusual that it was one that came straight across the sea into the Darwin Peninsula. The Darwin city, its airport, the airbase, all of the infrastructure, the power supplies and sewage, the port and everything is contained in a fairly narrow peninsula, and the cyclone seemed to know where everything was. By the way, can you see where my pointer is? This is an actual copy of the barograph from the event. It was taken at the airport. The barograph was right in the almost at the centre of the airport, and that is where the eye actually passed. It did pass virtually down the main runway of Darwin Airport. The pressure went down below to the point where the barograph could continue recording. At this point here, you can see it's actually gone off the paper. So it may have been the record low pressure, but the barograph only goes down to 950, and that was what was officially recorded as the minimum pressure. But you can see that the trace is actually off the edge of the paper. And the bottom illustration is a recording of the wind speed from the anemometer at the standard anemometer point on the aerodrome. As the eye passed, something struck the top of the anemometer and carried away the head. So it stopped recording at 300 kilometres an hour, That's in the old parlance, it was about 200 miles an hour, which, as you know, is well above flying speed for most aircraft, or most light aircraft. The estimated maximum wind speed was 350 kilometres an hour. And there were some points in the cyclone where the wind speed theoretically may have been over 400. But I'll tell you a little bit more about that a bit further on. This shows the path of the cyclone. It came in over the Arafura Sea, and like most cyclones, it was expected to continue on, bypassing Darwin, maybe raising a bit of white caps in the harbour and maybe a bit of wind, but it was expected to go on around the west coast and then turn down and eventually end up maybe at Port Hedland. But this one didn't. For some reason, it turned when it got to Bathurst and Melville Island and came in. It seemed, you could almost make a story about it knowing where all the valuable facilities were. It came in over Cox Peninsula and completely destroyed Radio Australia. All of the wonderful towers that we had up there, which used to provide Australia's and Western voice in most of Asia, was destroyed. And then, if I go on to the next slide, we'll have a more detailed look. So here it is coming in over the sea, headed for the airport. The airport is a bit north of the city. Here's the city down here with its sitting right on the harbour, and that was the plotted path that it was expected to follow. What it did when it got to the outskirts, it made sure it destroyed Lee Point, which is where there were some receivers located. It destroyed the northern suburbs. It remembered that it had to do the airport, so it took a turn, came back, made sure it demolished the central business district, did the airport, and then continued on, made sure it got the Royal Australian Navy communications facility, went on and made sure it got the DCA transmitters and the RAF transmitters. So there were no communications, no radio communications left in Darwin at all. As it came over the port, it sunk 3 patrol boats in the harbour. There was 16 people drowned at sea. So there was no marine communication facilities available. It's useful to remember when we get on to what actually happened later, that everybody knew about the cyclone was coming. They had, you know, the local radio station was broadcasting the regular cyclone warnings every half hour, the siren whooping sound, and the ABC radio announcer warning people that a cyclone was imminent, that everybody should have already had the emergency water supply and they should be heading for the smallest room in the house with the most walls, which was the water closet or the bathroom. But at midnight, when the cyclone was only a few miles away, this is, by the way, this bottom part of the slide shows it's an actual photograph of the radar, the RAF radar at the time. I think this was taken at midnight, and here's the most intense cyclone that's ever been recorded in Australia up to that time, and it's about I think 20 miles out off the coast, but the people were still going about their business. Some of the parties were still ending at midnight. People were going to midnight mass at the Catholic Church. So they knew about it, but they couldn't believe that it was going to actually hit. After the cyclone, I went up there to manage the rehabilitation of the aerodrome. It was decided within a few hours of the cyclone that the city had virtually ceased to exist. There was nothing left. There was not over 90% of the living accommodation had been destroyed. Sewage didn't function. There was no power supply, no water supply, no telephone, no radio, no food, no bakery operating. Can you imagine, say, 15,000 fridges and 15,000 freezers full of Christmas hams and turkeys without power, and they're in a tropical area. It's going to reach 35 degrees that day, so everything is going to rot from then on, and there's nothing to eat. When the people got up the next morning, those that had survived, you turned on a tap and there was no water. There was nowhere to go to the toilet. You couldn't even find your shovel because it had been blown away like all the other debris, so you couldn't dig a hole. So it was decided to evacuate the whole city. We're looking here at a view of the Darwin Airport. The main runway is running from left to right across the top. That's the east-west or 1129 runway, and the other one is the 1836 or the north-south runway. The group of hangars and things across the front are light aircraft hangars. This is an operations building which is roofed at this stage, but it had been re-roofed within I think a week and a half of the cyclone. That's where our communications for civil aviation and air traffic control was concentrated. Looks like a quite orderly array of light aircraft on the ground here. We'll have a look at other slides that show where it was on the ground, and the main terminal is over this area here. Well, as you get closer, you can see the damage that was done to the hangars. I'll blow it up here. This is a hangar which is completely devoid of roofing and walls. The skeleton stood up very well. An interesting thing to think about is what happened to all of that tin that was on there. There were sheets of iron, say 20 feet long, some of them longer, by 3 or 4 feet wide. So all of the tin on there was separated into individual pieces, and it was doing 200 miles an hour, not necessarily edge on, by the way. It was whirling around, a blizzard of steel going across the aerodrome and taking anything that was above the ground with it, including things like the windsock and the top of the anemometer. And the same sort of thing was going on in the suburbs, but with smaller pieces of tin. There's some World War II hangars here, which when you looked at them, you could see cannon fire damage from the Jap bombing raids in 1940, and they had survived. The Japs okay, but it didn't survive Tracy. Some more hangars down here. And you notice how the ground is covered with debris. This is this particular shot was 5 weeks after the event, in which most of the debris that was in the way or was considered to be a hazard like it might have blown onto the main runway and damaged aircraft after we got it going, it being removed. Another shot showing some of the damage. This might be an interesting one. Here is a concrete block building which was built to withstand bomb damage, would you believe? It's actually a toilet block. If you look closely, you can see the individual cubicles. Here's the gents' entrance and the ladies' entrance on the other side, and it survived except for the roof. Got no idea where the roof went, but the roof wasn't made of tin. The roof was made of reinforced concrete. Closer to the individual hangars, this is what it looked like when you were posted on ground. And by the way, there were people in some of these areas when it happened. So one of the jobs that the Army got to do about a week after the cyclone was to go around and check every damaged building and to clear it as being free of bodies. Sorry, I haven't got a closer view of this, but this is a DC-3 which started off on the other side of the hangar and was blown over the top of the hangar and distributed across the airfield. And this shot was taken when they used a bulldozer to push it back up into the heap of the hangar. Just off the edge of the airport, the surrounding suburbs, anyone that's been to Darwin knows that it's a tropical place, and it's normally covered with beautiful trees and frangipanis, with the trunk of the frangipani is about 2 foot diameter. Everything's green, and you can almost see it growing, and especially in the wet season, you can almost see it growing. Well, this was the wet season, and things had been growing, but there's almost no vegetation left. There are trunks of trees there. If I blow it up, from my position I can see trunks of trees, but there's not a blade of grass, not a leaf left on any tree. And the frangipani as well. And the suburbs are the same. This is some of the 15,000 houses that were destroyed. These houses have been re-roofed. You can see there's tarpaulins, and some of them have been covered temporarily with tin that's been recycled from other areas. Wherever you went in the suburbs, it was the same. Everything was destroyed, nothing left. It reminds you that this few slides were taken about 4 or 5 weeks after the event, but immediately after the event, all of those roads were covered the same as this area here. All of these roads were covered with the tin and fibro and debris, and also a mixture of heavy aluminium overhead wires, which were a great hazard when you're driving or driving a car or a truck trying to pick your way between the debris or driving over it. It's difficult to see the wires, and a few times we were suddenly brought up short in the Falcon station wagon. A few shots along the road. This illustrates the normal arrangement for Darwin houses. The houses were elevated on with an open area underneath, except for a central core where you kept your lawn mower, and there was a garden shed and things like that. But the living quarters were above ground, and access was by a metal stairs arrangement. Can you imagine trying to get 2 kids and your pregnant wife down this exposed stairway where you have pieces of 6 foot long tin coming at you at 200 miles an hour and hitting the sloping handrail and careening up into the sky? It must have been horrific. People who lived through it said that it was like being in a 44-gallon drum full of ball bearings and being rotated. Other people said it was like being in a blizzard of steel. Mm-hmm. Most of the people who were there at the time won't believe that there are only 65 people died, of which 16 were drowned at sea. Most of them will say, well, I know 65 people that died, and I'm sure they can't be the same 65 people that everybody else in Darwin knew. So there were great conspiracy theories about how the government covered up how many people died. Alan Stretton, the Major General who arrived after dark on Christmas Day to take over the mandatory, perhaps, evacuation of Darwin, relates how about 1 o'clock in the morning he got to the temporary police headquarters, which was being used also as a temporary morgue, and how he and his aide were told to watch their step as they walked through the room, because it was literally flowing in blood. It was being used as a temporary morgue. He said it was the most distressing thing he'd ever seen. 13 of the bodies were of infants. Familiar story. The trick was to get into the smallest room of the house because it was generally the strongest. When it started to blow down, you moved into the water closet itself, but eventually there was nothing left. You had to get out, and you had to brave going down the stairs. You had to stand up in the wind, 200 miles an hour. Who among us could stand up in a 200 mile an hour wind? Well, they had to if they had to get off the platform without being blown off. And this is a shot from the raised platform of one of the houses, and as far as you can see, there is it's all the same. Everything is demolished, wrecked and destroyed. Can you imagine trying to pick your way through that with a couple of kids and your wife in tow? It was Christmas Day, by the way. The Christmas presents were all blown away, of course, along with your family photos, your handbag if you're a lady. Everything was gone. From the air, the infrastructure at the port doesn't look too bad. These are the big fuel tanks. They weren't damaged, but there was no power to pump fuel, no electricity. The diesel engines that ran back up were damaged or otherwise put out of action. This shows a helicopter landing pad with a helicopter there, which was used to ferry people to a hospital on board the Melbourne. This is our flag ship of the Australian fleet in those days, the Melbourne aircraft carrier. And it's a wonderful thing, an aircraft carrier in times like these. It is a hospital for about 1,000 people. It's got a workshop which can do almost anything you need in the mechanical engineering line. And it's a haven, somewhere you can live where, well, somewhere you can live. Remember that because it's a tropical area, if you don't wash for 3 days, you'll have fungus literally growing in your armpits or in your crutch. If you don't, if you wear a watch for 2 days without taking it off and watching your hand, you'll have a band of pustules around your wrist. So within a day of this happening, the authorities needed to begin mass inoculation of everybody against typhoid and tetanus. Tetanus because almost everybody had lacerations and there was no way to keep clean properly, so tetanus is a great problem. And Darwin, of course, is home to the typhoid mosquito. The CBD looked much better. I'm not sure whether you can see this. I'm having difficulty looking at it from the side, but it's this is the headquarters of the Royal Australian Navy on the shores of the harbour, which didn't survive. Toys R Us, yes. It happens to be the place where Alan Stretton commandeered the optician there to come and fix his glasses. Or he didn't personally, but somebody else went and dug this guy out to come and fix Alan Stretton's glasses, because he got there without his spare set of glasses, and his broke, so he couldn't read anything. Now, by this time on Christmas Day, the radio stations in the southern cities were broadcasting messages, urgent messages to all the armed forces to report for duty, because there had been no communication with Darwin for such a long time from any part of Darwin, that local commanders in Perth, Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane and so on thought that Australia had been possibly invaded, so they were actually starting to call up the army. A radio station in Sydney saying that there was a little bit of damage in Darwin overnight, nothing serious. This was on Christmas Day 1974, December the 25th. Tell me, is there a female figure viewable somewhere in that picture? In a red dress? I can't see from the side, but there is one there. It only illustrates the point that in Darwin, the young women during the dreadful wet season usually wear 3 items of clothing, it's said, 2 of which are thongs. This particular shot was 5 weeks after the event, and like everyone else there, I was struck dumb by the sight of this beautiful young person walking along in an ankle-length red gown, absolutely unheard of, and traffic literally stopped in the street. At that time there were no women in Darwin. Darwin was evacuated entirely of women, and they weren't allowed back for about 5 months after, and you could only get back there then if you were a nurse or a doctor, or you had some critical role to play, or and even after that event, you could get back if you had a husband there who signed a piece of paper saying you were allowed to come back. So it was a small thing now, but I can tell you it was absolutely amazing. Little shot showing the light aircraft area. Take note of this aircraft here. It's a Fairchild F-27. There are a couple of DC-3s which weren't there at the time. They flew in after the cyclone. They're quite serviceable. And all of these aircraft lined up here are actually wrecked aircraft. Okay, this is the Fairchild F-27. Unfortunately, there's somebody's parked a car there where I needed to take the photo, but what happened with the F-27 was it was just sitting there. It wasn't tied down, of course. It's a big aircraft, 42 tonnes or maximum on-up weight, and its props would have been in ground fine during the cyclone, and so we estimate that they were probably starting to overspeed. And meanwhile, light aircraft were being blown across the hard stand into the propellers of this F-27, which just chopped them up and spat them out. And this is the remains of one aircraft. You can see its red tail sticking up there, and it is flayed in between. It's chopped up like a fish fillet. That's another one that was spat out behind. And these are the remains of the aircraft which were blown off of where they were and ended up in the untidy heap. There's a beautiful Dove aircraft there. More pictures of the damaged aircraft. Oh, before I leave this one, it illustrates a bit of an ingenuity, I suppose. these are all damaged aircraft in the foreground, but behind there's a photo of a car turned upside down. You notice that it's got one wheel missing. Well, when you were trying to get out of Darwin in a couple of days after the cyclone, you will definitely need tyres, because you will have damaged most of your tyres in driving around. So you just find another car that's been turned upside down. You don't have to jack it up to get the wheels on it. This was another aircraft that was flayed by the F-27 propellers. By the way, in looking at the F-27, the props didn't look damaged at all. Not the slightest bit, except for a few scars on the de-icing boots on the prop. It wasn't only the F-27 that damaged the aircraft, by the way. They were just damaged by being rotated and thrown against things. The tower was not operational. It was still standing there, but all of the windows had been blown out. But 6 days after the cyclone, I was amazed that all the rest of us were walking around. The people who'd been there at the time almost all had bloody bandages on their legs from just coming up against sharp bits of tin. But the RAF officers in the tower turned up in the absolute immaculate uniforms, beautifully pressed and laundered shirts, ties, well, they didn't wear ties, but polished shoes, of course, and beautiful socks. Not a spot on them. I don't know how they did it, because their mess was in the same sort of state that everybody else's house was in. This is a cement block house which was meant to withstand enemy action, and this is a reinforced concrete roof which had been blown off. All of the power supplies in Darwin failed because, well, all of the underground power supplies failed because once the power was turned off them, they cooled down, and with the tropical moisture everywhere, the tropical moisture got into the joints and they all failed. There were volunteer electricians and linemen from all over Australia in Darwin helping to sort it out. Close-up picture, or near pictures of the DCA receiving station, I think this one is, with the remains of towers collapsed on it. This is a 150-foot tower lying on the ground. These blocks are 1.5 ton blocks each, and they were just pulled out of the ground. Sorry, did they come up with what? Yes, there were 10 inches of rain overnight. Not a lot of rain, but it all fell in a very short time. Yeah, 10.5 inches. That was in the first 12 hours. But it rained for a few days afterwards, of course. If you took refuge in a car, it might be the last thing you did. Comment by a local. Yeah, imagine being in there. If you evacuated your flat or something and got into your car, you could end up like that. Of course, after the event, that was covered with bricks and masonry. That's the picture there is taken after the army took enough away so that they could verify there was nobody inside it. This shows a crop spraying aircraft. It reminds me that within 2 days after the event, the fleas everywhere multiplied. There was that much rotten stuff around, there was flies, it was a bit like hell, I suppose. And to add to our misery, we were crop sprayed every day by a crop spraying aircraft. They were actually crop spraying us with insecticide to kill the fleas, but they reckon that was better than the other things that we could get. This is my quarters there. We commandeered, oh sorry, this isn't. This is another above ground house that was demolished. This is my headquarters that we commandeered a motel and it had a couple of rooms that were still habitable. There's no glass left in the windows, but we did manage to stay dry. This is showing the afternoon weather, which is very much par for the course in Darwin. You only need one weather forecast in Darwin through the wet season. It'll be 32 with an afternoon storm, and this is one of their afternoon storms. Okay, so that gives you a good idea of what it was like. In the CBD, we have the same sort of destruction, emergency police vehicles. The airport lighting was restored after a few hours. And if we had time, I'd show you some nice pictures of the Concorde landing at Darwin, the Vulcans and things that happened over the years when I managed to get to Darwin and see some of the wonderful aircraft they had. So thanks very much for listening, and I'll hand it over to Brian.